Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village to raise their neurodivergent children with confidence and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and fellow parent walking this journey with you. Each week, we shine a light on the professionals, resources, and real world strategies that can empower you to navigate the IEP process and beyond. Whether you're tuning in live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we're so glad you're here. Feel, feel, Please feel free to ask questions live or in the comment section. We promise to respond. So let's dive in and meet today's amazing guests. Today, we're joined by Debbie Rosen and Lindsey Thoms, co-owners of the StudyPro, which is an executive functioning and study skills center that's changing the way the students learn to learn. At the StudyPro, Debbie and Lindsey work with students who are smart and capable but feel stuck. Not because they don't understand the content like math or writing, but because managing it all, planning, starting, and following through feels overwhelming. Instead of handing out another planner or checklist, they focus on helping students notice what's going on and what's getting in their way. They'll ask things like, "What do you notice when you read these directions?" Guiding students to uncover the real barriers behind procrastination, disorganization, or avoidance. Through this process, students don't just get their work done, they build the confidence and skills to say, "I can see what's holding me back, and I know how to move forward." It's powerful work that transforms not just school performance, but how kids approach challenges for life. Lindsey and Debbie, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having us. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it because, the first thing that pops in my head, like, how many IEPs have I written that will use the agenda book, And it's like, okay, we've had that on the IEP for 5 years and they're still not using the agenda book. Like, where do we go? What do we do? So, let's get to the basics of, the executive functioning skills. Like, why are they so important for kids?
Yeah, I mean, I can start there because I relate to what you're describing as a special education teacher myself, having sat in those same IEP meetings. The agenda, the planner, that is the strategy. And we as adults might see that strategy is incredibly effective. It might bring us relief when we lay everything out and we chunk things out. However, what an executive function is really the skill that allows you to achieve a goal. So any goal in the future that will benefit your future self. And so because they're skills, that means that they're developmental. So take the planner, for instance. The planner might be recommended as a strategy or an accommodation or support for a student who has missing work. So the assumption there is they just need time management. They need time management as the remedy. Well, there's the layer behind that, and that's the executive function skills. And primarily what we might see is initiation. Initiation is one of the executive function skills that a lot of students face as a barrier. And so if you think about it logically, if you think, hey, if I look at a planner and now I see it all laid out, now I see 10 things that I'm going to have trouble initiating on. It doesn't bring the same relief that it might to us as adults who trust that we have that skill. And we forget maybe that we didn't always have that skill and we had to learn it through experience and we had to build our confidence and we had to build our own strategies. Like we were both saying that sometimes our initiation skill in the morning is even just having a cup of coffee. That's kind of our start routine.
Right.
That we pair something that we like coffee with something that maybe we don't like trying to weed out the hundreds of emails that I have in my inbox right now, whatever it might be. But if you think about executive functions as a whole, it's important just to remember that point that they're the skills that are developmental that allow you to achieve a goal for your future benefit. And so because of that developmental piece, they really needed to be scaffolded, directly taught, and really supported, not just the jump to the solution.
Right. And not an agenda book works for everybody. Right?
Exactly.
Because it doesn't. I know some people that are like, oh my God, if I have an agenda book, I won't do anything because it's just too much, right?
When if you think about what are the skills you actually need to use that agenda book, right? So I was actually just on the phone right prior to this with a parent who said, who said what an incredibly intelligent woman who is very, very, very knowledgeable about, the mental health and academic support that her student needs, but said, it really is time that we stop, creating this scaffolding for this young man. He's in 10th grade and he really needs to learn all these things. And, what's interesting is that when you really peel the layer back, there is not scaffolding for this young man. There are reminders for the young man, but the young man doesn't have a chance to build the skills. And I said, well, that same brain that has all this missing work at the end of every one of the semesters is the same brain that says, I've got it. I can make that plan and I can, use that planner so that I won't have that again, but it keeps happening. And so what I think that, you were asking earlier, like, what are executive functions? Those are the skills that allow you to use those solutions. And so really, as Lindsey was saying, the reason that we don't jump into the idea of like a planner isn't because a planner is a bad thing. It isn't because a planner wouldn't work for some people, as you were saying, some people it doesn't, but because we also need to develop the skills to be able to use the planner and even understand if that planner is the right solution for that particular child. And so I know we're going to kind of unfold and unravel this big ball of yarn as we talk throughout the day. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about noticing what is the gap between the potential of what this student might have and where they are. And if there is a gap, like we were talking about this young man, what are the skills that we need to develop to help them fill that gap versus the reminders of that, that you have this gap.
Yeah. And that's, like, and thinking about it and starting from the beginning, like, why are you stuck? Because everybody's, what is the reason you're not starting? And that, like, to dig into that, because is it because you're too overwhelmed? There's too much? Are you going down a rabbit hole that you don't fully understand what step one is supposed to be and what the parameters are? Or, are you having anxiety? Are you afraid of doing it wrong? Like, there's all these reasons of why a child might not, or even an adult isn't starting that one thing, right? And before, you can't find a solution until you know your starting point, right?
Yeah. It's so important. And that's why I think you mentioned in our very kind intro about even reading the directions and seeing what we notice together. And I was grateful for the opportunity with a student last night who AP history class had assignments of watching videos and taking notes on a note sheet. And immediately when they opened up and saw the very well-crafted, very well-meaning directions from the teacher, instantly became overwhelmed. Because the videos were about 7 minutes long, but the length of directions just made his brain go haywire. And it immediately was like, this is going to take forever. I don't have forever. So those thought processes go to, I don't think I'm capable of doing this. So then I'm going to want to avoid that pain. So luckily that what I felt grateful for is that he was in a supportive environment and we were there to be able to strategize with him to talk it through. So let's look at how long the videos were. Instantly, when he saw that there were 7 minutes, there was a little bit of relief, like, oh, okay. And then I was very excited just because I'm geeky with this kind of thing too, but I was able to show him how Chrome now lets you split the tabs. So he could have the videos on the one side of the screen and have the notes sheet on the left side of the screen, because that's really a working memory barrier, is when you're watching a video and then switching a tab back to take the notes. That does make you less efficient. That can slow you down. And when it comes to the executive functions, like working memory, initiation, when those are taxed, which that student already was feeling that taxation on those, then your emotional control is the one that's going to take the hit. And what he saw in that moment was that I can have those thoughts and I can have those feelings, but there can be a solution. There can be a strategy. There's, that beautiful, you can't control your first thought, but you can maybe control your second. They can't yet until they have the experience of that relief and in that supportive environment. So that's what we're grateful for, to be able to just discover those barriers with a student. It's not like we're seeking out barriers or seeking out a frustrated student, but we're really grateful for the chance to sit side by side with them when they are experiencing some of those barriers and then be able to strategize with them.
Right. And It helps them become self-aware and be able to do it in the like, that's the skill that we need, moving into an adulthood and stuff, is that we don't need somebody to say, "Here, use a planner, that's how you need to fix it." We need somebody to take that step back and be like, "Okay, I'm having anxiety because I see too much and there's too
Mhm.
much going on, so now let me teach myself how to break it down." And like on IEPs, we see in the supplementary aids and services, like, oh, we'll break down, do a task analysis and break down assignments. I'm like, okay, but you doing it first of all, puts more on the teachers, which, as we all know, teachers don't need any more on their plates. But if we take the time to teach the child how to do it and do it with them, yes, it might take a little bit more time from the teacher now, but in the long run, it takes less time. And we're also empowering the child to be able to do it on their own.
Yeah, I love the word self-aware, and we talk about this all the time, and we couldn't agree with you more. And we know that it's a process, but really the first step in that process is one of the words we love so much is noticing, and kind of getting back to that idea of noticing what is in that gap, right? What are the things that I want to do? Because we know these kids really want to be successful, but have yet to know how to do. And I probably don't even know exactly what's missing in terms of skills. And that's why they tend to get frustrated or, down on themselves so often. And, we probably for the context of this conversation should talk a little bit about what exactly, are the executive functions. And we follow something called the BRIEF, the Behavior Rating Index of Executive Functions. And so we ourselves, as our part of our model, recognize 8 different executive functions. And those include, as Lindsey was talking about, initiation. So the ability to take action and get started, right? So we know that, as one example, executive functions are more accessible when they're preferred tasks. So, hey, would you like to initiate to go get, an ice cream cone? I'm in, but then when they're non-preferred, like the AP history for this poor young man, right? It's not as accessible. But then there's inhibition. So that's the ability to ignore distractions and temptations. And so that obviously we see often in terms of I maybe start something and then I'm not able to, stay focused on that. Or for me, I have a hard time when I really want to say something. and Naomi, that's my daughter. Sorry. We can tell how close Lindsey and I are. So Lindsey does this. So it's her way of inhibiting. So it reminds her, I don't need to talk now, but I will do that. Shifting, which is having the mental flexibility to easily switch from one task to another, or thought process to another. And emotional control, which again, she referred to earlier. I'll take a little pause to say that we often wonder, like, wait, isn't the amygdala all about the emotions? And yes, of course, but it's the governor, right? Being able to manage the emotions. So we, as adults, oftentimes have an emotion and we're like, okay, that bubble, I'm not going to say it. That's my inhibition, right? Or I'm going to get really mad and I am going to pause and think. And so I'm managing that emotion. So the ability to manage your feelings along the way to those goals. So again, going back to that example of like freaking out about that, preamble in that history assignment, I can manage my emotions to be able to look past that and say, okay, well, what might I be able to do to feel more comfortable about getting through that using AI or using split screen or doing these other things. Working memory, so the ability to hold on information and use it effectively. A lot of times parents will say, well, I don't understand why they did the work and didn't turn it in. Because you have to hold those things in your working memory, or sometimes kids, of course, will have problems with certain challenges with certain types of problems because they have a harder time with working memory. Planning and organizing, which is what is often so associated with executive function, right? Everybody thinks, oh, executive function, they just need to have a plan, or they just need to be more organized. But, it's really about setting the goals and using a strategic approach to achieve that plan. And that's a lot of that skill we were talking about earlier that's harder for kids in terms of when they are actually using their planner, actually having the skills to use that planner and to be able to plan themselves. And so we often hear about things like chunking. That's kind of a feature of planning, and it's a skill. But again, a lot of times the whole concept of knowing how to plan and sticking to a plan is a challenge. And I often will talk to parents and say, if we all were great, all had great executive functions and planning skills, if it was just about having the plan, then we'd all be thin and fit because we all know what to do, right? It's just oftentimes there's a breakdown. And then the last two are materials organization, which is a little self-explanatory, but to be able to create and maintain those systems that keep your belongings and plans in order, and then self-monitoring. So, oftentimes maybe people will not kind of mirror the emotions that are in the room, or maybe talk louder than expected, or not know that they're rushing through work. And so it's that ability to monitor and evaluate our own performance and keep track of actions that impact our goals. So it's important sometimes I think for us to actually name what those executive functions are, because we want students to understand what skills they're building. And we don't believe in keeping secrets with our students. And so it's important for them to believe, well, you know what, I'm just need an initiation strategy here, or, that's a working memory thing. So maybe I could use Google Keep and have my steps here so that I don't keep forgetting and feeling like I'm just going to give up. So these are all things that are really important in terms of, as we think about executive function support, that we're naming these things, we're helping students understand what's really breaking down in all of the areas, or any of the areas.
Right. Yeah. And it just, I mean, for me, being able to put a name on it is helpful, I'm sure, because everybody's like, oh, I have poor executive functioning skills. Well, what does that mean? And like, right. Like, okay, great. You have poor executive functioning. And now what? And I see it again all the time on IEPs and stuff, is everybody chunks it all together. Well, we need to teach them how to organize. So we're going to use a planner, and like everything's always the same, which is obviously not individualized like it should be. But it's also, who is able to teach these kids and to dig down? You know what I mean? Like, how can we dig down deep enough as parents, or as outside providers, or as teachers, or as, IEP members and stuff? Like, what is the best way to like figure out what does this child need and how can we get there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because what we're looking for, right? We want kids to be able to identify with a skill and not just a symptom. And that's what we need for the adults too. And for any supportive people around them, is the symptoms sometimes are really easy to recognize, like missing work, or a sloppy, disorganized desk, or backpack, or forgetting things, or all of those. And all those symptoms then equate to identities. Like, I'm a procrastinator. Like,
Yep.
they just become labels. So what it really requires, which is, the hard work that I want to acknowledge for every helper in a kid's life, especially for parents, but also, as a teacher myself in the classroom, I didn't know what I know now. And I wish I did. I want to go back to my younger self and kind of impart as much wisdom as my younger self would allow. I know I was pretty stubborn, so I don't know how much would have gotten in, but what I've learned is, especially with the study of executive functions, is that because they're skills, then I need to actually slow down my process a lot more and get way more curious with a student. It also requires an incredible amount of your own executive functions too. So there requires a lot of regulation, emotional regulation on the adult's part. And so sometimes that's really hard to do. Like, for a parent, when the symptoms become most prevalent is when the test grade comes back, or the report card comes, or the email from the teacher comes that says they have 15 missing assignments and they didn't come to office hours today. Obviously, that's going to cause a huge cortisol spike in that very loving, supportive parent, because they're scared for their kid and they're not sure how to help. And that's when, as Debbie referred to earlier, what kind of scaffolds might a parent have before they know this information is a reminder. Like, that would even be wonderful, right? Could you imagine even having that kind of self-regulation to get an email like that and then just be like, oh, hey, buddy, I got an email from your teacher. No, it doesn't. That conversation, I'm sure, sounds different. And probably a lot more elevated voices in the household, because we know that it's coming from a place of fear. We as adults, we know that it's because we're scared for our kid. It's our job to protect them, or we believe our job is to protect them. So we want to absolve any future pain or suffering for them. We can see that. The analogy that we use a lot of times is because adults, we can see the train coming down the track and it looks like they're standing on the train and just refusing to move. And so that amount of self-regulation that we need, and then the slowing down to get curious with them. So what we often encourage is just in the time that you can go to lunch with your kid and just talk to them. Like, what do you notice is easier to get started with? We actually have a deck of cards that we, Debbie and I kind of put together that have a bunch of these questions that were meant to help practitioners really neutralize the conversations. Like, how do I have a conversation with a student that doesn't feel like I'm trying to fix you in the moment, or I'm trying to jump to a solution and solve that problem for you,
or grill you,
or the biggest,
or punish you, right? Like,
yeah, it's the shame. There's a students, especially any students with executive dysfunction, especially students with ADHD or autism, can have a very quick shame trigger because of that. And what's honest is that in the one-on-one conversations that we've had, most of the students that I've talked to say, well, to be fair, I didn't do it. To be fair, they always take this empathetic view of their parent or the teacher. Now, what I will acknowledge and validate is they're never doing that with you, like as the parent. They're never seeing your perspective, especially in the middle of the blow up. But I get the benefit, yes, lucky me, that gets to see all that side of them that says, yeah, they're just as frustrated, if not more, with the inability to access these skills as you are. So that's where I would say is the partnership that can happen is just saying, find the times to get curious with your kid or your student just about what they notice works for them, what they've tried before, what's frustrating for them, and just for you to go into that conversation knowing that it's not your job to fix at that moment.
Right.
It's just your job to just be there and listen.
Yeah, it's what's coming up for me is like my daughter, who's on the spectrum with PDA profile, is it's 6th grader, and like, you know, I was looking at her and I was like, oh, you have a missing assignment. She's like, what? And I showed it to her. I'm like, wait a minute, we did that together. What happened? And her saying, I just kept forgetting to turn it in. And that was the end of the conversation. Like, I wasn't gonna, like, okay, you know, but now I'm thinking like, what could have been my next question is like, I wonder why that happened. What do you think we can do to prevent that from happening in the future? Yeah. Right? So that like, yeah, it happened, no big deal, but now let's plan for it so it doesn't happen again.
That's a great reflection moment. And what I'll add is even just that word noticing, which just, yeah, as Debbie mentioned, we're becoming obsessive with how many times we use it. It could be a question that's even just saying, do you notice this happens with certain classes over others? Because it might even just be a chance for her to notice patterns. And sometimes this is what the gift that I wish I could give to every human, let alone any neurodivergent student here, was sometimes it is just a blip. Sometimes, but if it is a pattern, if it is something like maybe it is the class that's right after lunch or before lunch would probably be the more likely one of that.
Right.
There might be just the missed cue before to turn something in. So it's kind of giving them the chance to look back and notice like, oh yeah, what is the pattern here? Or is there a pattern? And then, yes, because
it's really about trying as hard as we can to stay in the neutral, curious zone of, you know, okay, we noticed that this occurred, rather than, okay, what can we do to fix it next time, which they may not know. It's almost like a detective trying to figure out a little bit more evidence of what we together could discover about it, so that we may then notice some things that would be amazing if she would be like, oh yeah, I did notice that it was right before lunch. Oh yeah, maybe it's a good idea if we notice that again, if you notice that there's a pattern right before lunch. Okay. And then that's what we can kind of leave, because it is an opportunity again to notice it, and over time be like, oh yeah, I'm noticing this before lunch. So maybe there are other things that I can do, because I think when kids feel listened to and heard, and we allow them to feel that they are the expert in them, then they'll always welcome our help. Yeah. And I think that, I made all these mistakes with my older one. And then I hung out with Lindsey for a really long time. And I would say my younger one, she sometimes still will get very defensive, but most of the time, honestly, I think because I've always believed that she is 100% committed to wanting to do well, and then the things that took away from that goal were not what she wanted, and things that moved her toward those goals were things we should celebrate, then it was an easier kind of easier set of experiences. In fact, just the other day, I don't even know if I told you this, Lindsey, she said, I really don't want to say this to you, but you were right all along about getting the help I needed from math, because I have to do it anyway. I know you were right. And I might as well do it with someone who could help me, because, she really struggles with math. So anyway, but we had a big whiteboard conversation, and we kind of looked at like what the evidence was. And so it says, okay, well, what are you noticing? And then of course she's like, but now she's able to reflect. We're like, it's amazing that you noticed that. Yep. And yay me, but I didn't say that.
That's amazing.
Because parents are allowed to have wins every once in a while, right?
I know. Well, it's just funny. Like there's so many times I say to my older one, like, oh, well, da-da-da-da. And she's like, Mom, you're wrong. And then like, okay, I'm not going to fight you about it. Okay.
Right.
And then like 3 days later, it's like, oh, da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, really? Which is exactly what I told her 3 days ago. And had she listened,
exactly.
I'm not going to rub it in your face. And she's just like, shut up, Mom. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. I just said, oh, that's interesting.
I literally had a friend come over and repeat to my daughter the exact thing I had said to my friend. And my daughter was like, God, that woman is so smart. And I'm like, huh, that's so funny. Okay.
I said the same thing.
Right? Yeah. But it's okay. It's okay.
That's what we say. Like, they don't listen to us all the time, No.
Like, it takes a village.
Right. Exactly. Which is where this show came about, is like, we all need the village.
Yes. Well, thank you for doing this, by the way. We should say that right up front. We really, really appreciate that. I'm sure that it's been incredibly helpful for so many people.
It is. I always say all the time, like, I love it because I learned pointers from my own self-parenting, because yes, I have degrees in education and special education and law, and I've been a parent for a couple of years, and I've taught and da-da-da. But guess what? We're all still learning. And our fabulous children, just when we think we have it figured out, they shift to something else, right?
Yes. Well, and I also feel like sometimes you hear things in different ways, different times. And we have a webinar that we do monthly, and we've done for the last 10 years, also very similar. And we honestly, sometimes I'll hear the same speaker, just several years later and think, oh, I know all this because they said this before. Not to say that it's not fantastic, but and then I'm like hearing something in a completely different time, because to your point, they're in a different way, because you're in a different time. And it's always helpful to hear these things over again, because we have our own executive function tanks, right? And our executive function tanks can really be depleted at the end of the day, or end of a rough period, or end of time. Many of us in this genre are taking care of older parents as well as younger kids. And like, I find myself there, and I think it can be, and, running businesses and things. And it can be very challenging for us, and to hear, others share, just to hear your experiences with the IEPs, it's really helpful for all of us, because then I think it's a little bit more empathy. We give ourselves a little more grace because we're not the only ones going through it. And it's great to hear. It's great to hear that, to a reminder that we can be a little more curious with our kids, for example, or not just jump to solutions. That I think a lot of times we don't notice ourselves that we're doing.
Yeah. It's also like, I'm thinking about like just talking through things. Like, what do we do? Like, today I can't tell you how many times I've said, I can't do it all, which, what, guess what? I can, because we have to, you know what I mean? And so, but like, if I talk that out loud with my kids around, like, wait, Mom feels that way too. And then I can talk through like, yes, I feel like I can't do it all, but guess what? I'm going to make that list of what needs to get done now, what can wait and what,
Mhm.
can wait even longer, and what can I outsource to somebody else. And like,
Look at
as
those
a
executive
parent,
function
I
skills.
know, right?
Yay.
Which,
Yay,
trust me, I didn't
you.
always have, but like, but that's the thing. It's like, we forget as parents that our kids need to be taught this. And how else are they going to learn it other than either hiring somebody to directly teach it, or just talking through how we do it and talking
Mhm.
out loud, kind of like we did when our kids were babies. Like, oh, now I'm putting on your left shoe. Now I'm putting on your right shoe. Like, teaching language, it's the same
Mhm.
basic thing of teaching the skills.
That's such a good point, and it's such a point that's supported with research with when it comes to the frontal lobe, which is where those executive functions are housed, and it's the last part of your brain to develop. And even new research is showing 32 is like the early time where it might be kicking online fully. But when I say kicking online, is exactly what you said. It's the part of the brain that absolutely requires modeling. That's what the research has shown, and it requires that talking out loud, not the modeling of the strategies, believe it or not, as much as the modeling of the acknowledging of a barrier and then trying to problem solve. So the talking out loud of like, ooh, how am I going to get this done? I'm feeling overwhelmed. That alone is something that is really helpful for the developing child's brain. But
Right.
oftentimes, adults, humans, we want to just show the perfect polished side. We want to just show the
Mhm.
outcome. And I hope I can speak like Debbie. Debbie has some of the best executive function skills, and I know oftentimes her daughter might say like, "It's easy for you," right? So
Mhm.
that like assumption that we're not showing our side of the grass or these internal barriers that we might be facing, and so they feel very alone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's where you're actually doing such a great service to your kid to, yes, we're going to model the strategies or how we might have come over with the barrier, but just even just talking out loud about what your thoughts are, what your feelings are, what feels like is getting in your way, what's in your control, what's out of my control,
Right.
how you might have to be flexible. That shifting skill is
Mhm.
executive function skill. So how I might model how I wanted to have this plan for dinner, and then dad came home with a pizza. So now I got to shift and manage my emotions with that. You don't have to keep that to yourself. That's actually a really good thing for your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense because it's just, thinking through everything and being able to relate. Like, like, what's triggering for me is remembering I did, when I was in my 20s in Florida. I was in a women's like therapy type group, and the therapist was very, very particular of making sure who's in it so that we didn't know each other outside. And I remember like one person, not to go into details, but like I remember one person like, wow, she's got like such an awesome life. You know what I mean? Like, and married to somebody wealthy, not having to work, living in this beautiful house. Oh, so awesome. And then once in the group together, it's like, you know what? She really doesn't have all her crap together as I thought she did.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and our kids, they think, oh, you have it all together. Life is so easy. You do all this and do that. But we don't,
Yeah,
just,
that's
yeah.
so true. And we often, I think, in the flip side, we often sometimes assume that with kids, not necessarily that they have everything together, but when you think about these kids that have executive function challenges, we think, well, they just have school to do and they just have to and we often talk about the ideas, the words just and should, as a way for ourselves as parents to notice that if we're using those words, if they just had a planner, if they just could write their stuff down, if they, they're so smart that they should be able to do X, Y, Z. And I think if there was anything that we took away, that a listener took away from this particular talk that we give, it's that, it's that comment in the note that I made earlier about the barriers, and really, the more kind of bringing all this conversation together, bringing the more that we can model that when we see a barrier, we might struggle. When we see a barrier, we have to maybe learn new things to be able to overcome those barriers. We might have to go out of our comfort zone. We often talk about the idea that change really only happens on the edge of comfort. We don't change and grow and learn in our comfy place, right?
Right.
And so a lot of times kids resist and they'll say, well, I've got it, right? I've got it. I don't need your help, because they don't want to be in this uncomfortable place. And we got to remember two things. One is that it's that same brain that's struggling with getting all their work done that's also saying that, right? So,
Right.
well, my kid keeps saying we got it, or they're not going to be comfortable, coming in to a place like StudyPro because there's other kids and that's going to be embarrassing. Helping them avoid that discomfort is not really giving them a service. It's not really doing them a lifelong service, because we can't help ourselves avoid discomfort for the rest of our lives. And I would also say, that now kind of lost what the second thing was, but I think that's one of the most important things is just that we want to recognize that, it's the same brain, but then also that we really want to help them learn how to do hard things, not just their homework, right? So how do we get them to learn to do hard things, which is, as Lindsey said, notice that barrier and then try different strategies until something works. And I think that's where we really like to share with parents that when there are all of these signs that things could be going better at school, whether it's just they're working way too hard because maybe they're feeling like they're perfectionistic or things have to be too perfect, so they're getting great grades, but at what cost? Or all the way to the fact that maybe they're missing a bunch of work, or maybe they're just going into another level of curriculum that might be harder than what they're used to, and they don't have the skills like note-taking or chunking or planning to be able to get there. This is just an opportunity for us to learn some new skills and to build those skills that are there for life. And Frances, you said, you really put it out there beautifully about how, you're still learning those skills and still using those skills and how important those skills are as adults. So that was a really, I think, important point for, I think, parents to take away, is that using the words should and just is a first sign, is a first clue that there's probably something else going on.
Yeah. I used to say all the time, don't should on yourself and don't should on others.
Right? Exactly.
Which is so true. But I hadn't heard the just, but that makes sense also. It's like, just what? Like, it's not just anything. Like, it might be just whatever, easy for us, but that's not for everyone.
Yeah.
It totally
watch the Olympics.
Right, exactly. Whatever, they just ran 100 yards. No big deal.
I have to tell my story, my anecdote that I swear is a direct line to my profession today. Was that homework was at the time easier for me when I was a kid, and my brother was the athlete, and I got frustrated one night trying to help him. Again, not my job, shocker that I became a special education teacher and then an executive function center. But even then I was trying to help him get his homework done. And he walked outside and I'm huffing and puffing and following him. And he threw a basketball and said, just make a layup. It's not that hard. Because in my exasperation, I was like, just do it. Like we're sitting here for hours. Just do the homework. It's not that hard. And that point just was so eloquently made by my annoying little brother that could say it in a way that communicated to me was this realization that, like the Olympics, me making a layup would have felt almost impossible because I didn't have the strategy, support, or experience to do that and the confidence to do that. Whereas my confidence landed in the homework realm. And that when Debbie mentions about the comfort zone and into the stretch zone and how to do hard things, kids hear that and their nervous system panics to be like, life has got to be hard and I have to have grit and I got to suffer and it's got to be miserable. And then the relief comes is like, oh, if I learn how to do hard things, it's actually, I'm learning how to make hard things easier. Like with the strategy, like with that student realizing that if I split my screen and I cut down the directions, that this actually took 20 minutes to do. That's what he learned. That he learned how to do a hard thing was pushing past his initial thought and his initial emotions and find a strategy. And that's what the relief that we hope to be giving to families overall, to the students first, and then to the families at large, is that the hard won't always feel this hard.
And that's one of the things I point out to my kids is like, but you've learned how to do hard things before too. Like, remember when you couldn't tie your shoes? Mm-hmm. And I had to tie your shoes, even though you were 10 years old, and that's okay. But you know what I mean? But you pushed through and you learned how to do it and you figured it out. So it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but with practice and with drive and with wanting to learn how to do it, you'll learn how to do it.
Right. And the piece thing is our frontal lobes also prevent us from referencing those experiences in the past. It's like there's no past self. So there's no, my brain will have a hard time accessing any kind of successes that I've ever had or any time that I've pushed through something hard. It's hard for me to remember those things. And what I have to acknowledge, especially when it comes to school, is and if the time the shoe came with a grade, I might not have had the same resilience as I might have had as a kid and learned. Like, why was that opportunity somewhere that I felt safe practicing? Why was that an opportunity where I had the chance to fail and learn from it? Whereas the minute that there's the stakes that are attached of grades, it doesn't feel like the learning zone and making those mistakes and taking the time to do the things that we have to do to learn. We have to get things wrong. We have to feel that hardship. It doesn't feel as safe anymore when they're students.
And it's, I say all the time that learning, I mean, this is the old the teacher in me, is that most learning comes from failures. Like if you go in and straight A, get everything right all the time, okay, great. You can regurgitate whatever you learned. But like when you fail and then you figure out what you did wrong, like that's when the true understanding and like aha moments come. So I always tell my kids, like, okay, you failed the exam. Okay, what did you learn? She's like, oh yeah, well, I now know what I did wrong and I know how to do it. I'm like, great. Then I don't care that you failed the exam, because you learned from it.
Exactly. There was a really famous TED Talk. Her name is Rita Pearson. Sadly, she's passed away, but she, every child deserves a champion, I think is what it was called. And we've been kind of preaching about that TED Talks since, if you're listening to this and you have a chance to go look it up, you should. It's, I think, 12 minutes and you will cry at the end, no matter who you are, because I did. But she just tells this young man, he says, but Miss Pearson, I have a 2 out of 12 on my exam. And why did you put a smiley face? And she just looked at him and said, because you're going to do better next time, aren't you? Right. Or, you didn't, or she, what she said was, it wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad. And, you're going to do it better next time. And she just really believed in the potential of kids to learn and to grow. And to your point, really that's what life is all about is it's not like we graduate from college and that the barriers stop presenting themselves. Right. So we really need this whole skill. And it's very similar to, what kids go through in therapy. We're very friendly with a lot of therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. And, that whole process of helping kids to notice, if they have deep anxiety, helping them to notice what are their thoughts and how are they feeling, where are they feeling it in their body. And then what are some strategies that you can use instead of going into this other place, right? A lot of times it is a choice between two very hard things. And, it can be anxiety telling you to react a certain way and you can be gripped by your anxiety. And that's a really hard place to be. But then saying I can be brave, I can be anxious and brave is also another very hard place to be, right? So you have to choose those hard things. And that's very much similar to what we work when we work with kids, not in that exact scenario, but more of just, you can see that assignment and feel overwhelmed and say, I'll do it later, which is a hard thing later. Or you can see it
later.
It's not going to be easier later, or you can see it and make a different choice of hard, which is I can maybe look at what options I have to make it feel less hard, to Lindsey's point. And those are very hard things until you've done it a few times. The other way, it can feel very hard, and that's why, we love the word strategies, notice and strategies. What do you notice about that makes you feel that way? So that when they notice that again, it's not just like, oh, okay, it's like, okay, I'm seeing a pattern. I'm noticing, I'm feeling this way, and then I can try something new.
And connecting it to like, I noticed this before and I've been here before and I got through it.
Yes.
Right. So like, so important.
And I'll make a plug a little bit for the noticing of the successes and strategies that they are using that they might not be as aware of. That takes a lot more effort sometimes to seek out and find. But asking even that question is like, have you like caught or noticed a time where it was easier to get started, or what's a strategy you use to overcome that? Like this, highlighting the successes is arguably even more important than reflecting on any of the barriers. Like the barriers is what we do, and that's how we support. And where the skills and that frontal lobe will continue to develop is if they also are able to reflect on the successes they have had. Because oftentimes when we even try to reflect with the student on the success, it's actually even harder. They'll be like, oh my God, you got an A, like great, but how? Like what strategies did you use? And that feels actually way more uncomfortable for them because they don't trust themselves to be able to replicate that yet. So they'll say, oh, it was just an easy test.
I got lucky.
Right? It was an easy unit, whatever it might be. They downplay some of their successes there. And that can be where some work is happening as well. It's just being like, well, I wonder what we could notice. I wonder what felt different about this. Why did this unit feel easier? And usually the first response is, I don't know. But if you kind of just sit in that silence for a little bit and just sit in the awkwardness and just give them some think time, then like in the case like Debbie referenced, like, well, I mean, I did work really hard with my tutor, or I did chunk that study guide up more, and I usually work on it last minute. That insight, and for them to be the ones to say it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. We used to say in personal growth seminars I did, it's like, well, if you did know, what would the answer be?
Even what could have affected
right. If you did know, it's like it's true. I mean, you guys have been so awesome. So let's before we wrap up, like what's one simple thing that parents could do or stop doing right now that could change things at least a little bit?
Do you want to go first, Lindsey?
Sure, I'll try. I mean, one thing that you said earlier that I wanted to reference is so powerful is that you said you held on to that assumption that we both had the same goal, that your daughter's goal was to do well. And that's first and foremost a regulation tool that parents can have. Because even though every action that you might be seeing from them, every behavior, everything might look like that they do not have the goal, they do. So if you can hold on to that belief that they have the goal to do well, and that there's might be something in the way, a barrier might be in the way, then the second piece would be to say, stay curious and don't correct. And start with that curiosity. And that we're all problem solvers, we're all mission-oriented people, most likely. And so our temptation to jump in and say, remind or give the strategy or the solution, like if you should,
right.
Then because what the reality is, and what I'm so grateful for, is I have enough data with all the experience of every kid that I've worked with for how many years now. I have the relief and I can regulate really easy that if I stay curious, they're going to say the same thing that I would have said. They're going to come to the same conclusion, but it requires the most work for me as the adult in the room to inhibit my own temptation from
exactly.
And I'll end with this. With one of our coaches had such a great analogy for that. When as they're learning these skills and practicing those skills, they said, "Oh yeah, so if I'm the one to jump in with the solution, that would be the same as if I was opening their Christmas gift on Christmas morning because I was so excited to unwrap what the gift was." And I was like, "That's such a great way to put it." Because we're even robbing themselves that chance of self-discovery. So that's what I was saying.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up right there with the one thing. Did you want one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Which is, is that it's to notice that there can be a missing skill. And so as Lindsey said, if we notice that they have the same goal as we do, then what is it? Then rather than jumping in trying to fix it, it's what are the skills that may be underdeveloped, and just those great aha moments like I had today right before I was referencing is, yes, there's a lot of scaffolding, but scaffolding is either us doing it for you, us putting our structure around you, us reminding you, versus understanding the need behind the behavior we're seeing from where you are now. So really accepting, okay, this is exactly where they are now. There may be missing work, there may be overwork. This is where they are, but what is that need behind the behavior? That's what I think we would hope, that if they did all of that, what Lindsey said and I said,
Right.
and and then remain curious, then I think the relationship would improve. They would start to find their own solutions through their own child. And, reaching out, of course, for help with a third party is certainly something fair as well. But even if you're not, ChatGPT has great examples too of how they can guide you through the conversation, if you're neutral and you use that approach.
Yeah. That's so awesome. So you said that. So for people that are like, oh, wow, I really want to connect with you guys and figure out like maybe it's a good fit for my child, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So you can info us, info at thestudypro.com, and that goes to Lindsey and I and one of our office manager. And I usually take most of the calls, and I love to talk to people about their specific scenario. What I really like, if you don't mind, about the StudyPro is that there's not just like one stop shop, in the sense that it's just about executive function coaching, because really there are a lot of kids that need a structure that's executive function based, that help them get their work done, to help relieve some of the stress and pressure at their home. So we have a homework center that does that, that has no time limits, that's based on executive function best practices, that has them practice all these skills. Just, again, using the analogy of sports, it's one thing to work with a coach on your basketball, but it doesn't mean you're giving up practice. And so the homework center for us is very much like them practicing these skills while they're getting their homework done. And then we have a study skills and strategies course. We also teach how to use AI ethically and responsibly to help with executive functions. We have a workshop for parents if they want to learn first how to help their student. And we talk about a lot of the stuff we talked about today in addition to the AI piece. And we have one for high schoolers. And so, those courses, I think, are really great fundamentals. Just, again, using that basketball analogy, like a basketball camp doesn't mean you don't need to practice or have a coach, but it does really have a great way of starting. So that's what I would say.
That is awesome. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, for coming on the show and sharing all of your wisdom. I learned so much, and I can't wait to start implementing some of it. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. Next week, we will have episode 131, Rethinking School and Socialization. Joseph Kavitsky from Fusion Academy of Rockville will be our guest. You can always learn more and connect with me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember, you do not have to do it all alone.